morning, and welcome to Tuesdays with the Pilgrim. Today we continue our journey with Christiana, Mercy, and the four boys with chapter 27. Part 1, they reflect on Greatheart's victory. Now I saw that they went on to the rise that had been formed to be a lookout for pilgrims. From this same place Christian had first caught sight of his brother, Faithful. So they sat down here and rested. They also ate and drank and celebrated their deliverance from such a dangerous enemy. As they sat and ate, Christiana asked their guide if he had been hurt at all in the battle. "Only a few wounds," replied Greatheart, "and yet rather than being a handicap, it is presently a proof of my love to my master and to you. It will be a means, by God's grace, to increase my reward. So don't feel bad for me." "But weren't you afraid, Greatheart, when you saw him coming at you with his club?" asked Christiana. "It is my duty to distrust my own ability," replied Greatheart, "so that I might have full reliance on him who is stronger than all." "But what did you think when he caught you with that first blow and sent you to the ground?" asked Christiana. "Well, I remembered that my master was treated thus, and yet it was he who conquered in the end." "You all think what you please," said Matthew, "but I will tell you what I think. I think God has been wonderfully good to us, both in bringing us out of this valley and in delivering us out of the hand of this enemy. I see no reason why we should ever distrust our God again. In a place like this, he has given us this incredible testimony to his love." Chapter 27, Part 2. Mr. Honest. After this they got up and proceeded on their way. Now not far ahead of them stood an oak tree, and when they came up to it, they saw beneath it a pilgrim who was fast asleep. They could tell that he was a pilgrim by his clothing, his staff, and his belt. So Greatheart awakened him, and the old gentleman lifted up his eyes and cried out, "What's the matter? Who are you? What is your business here?" "Come, sir, don't be so upset. There are none here but friends." But the old man got up and, standing his ground, demanded what their business was. "My name is Greatheart. I am the guide of these pilgrims who are going on to the celestial country." Then the man, whose name was Mr. Honest, said, "Have mercy on me. I feared that you were part of the band who sometimes go about robbing Little Faith of his money. But now that I have my bearings again, I can tell that you are more honest than they." "Tell me," said Greatheart, "what would or could you have done to help yourself, if indeed we were part of that group?" "Done?" asked Mr. Honest. "Why, I would have fought for so long as I had breath left in me, and if I had done so, I am sure you could not have prevailed over me, because a Christian can never be overcome unless he yields himself to it." "Well spoken, Mr. Honest," said Greatheart. "By this I know that you are right on the mark, for you have spoken the truth. "And I can tell by your statement that you know what a true pilgrimage is," said Mr. Honest, "for all the others think that we will be the most quickly overcome of all." "Well," said Greatheart, "since we have so happily met one another, I really want to know your name and where you have come from." "I cannot tell you my name, but I came from the town of Stupidity. It is not too far from the city of Destruction." "Oh!" exclaimed Greatheart. "Are you then that countryman? I have half a guess who you are. You are old Mr. Honesty." The man blushed a little and replied, "Not honesty in the abstract, but honesty is my name. I can only wish that my nature will agree with what I am called. But, sir, how could you guess that I am such a man, since I came from such a place?" "I heard your name come before my master," replied Greatheart, "for he knows all the things that are done on earth. But I have often wondered how any should be able to find their way from your place, since that town is even worse than the city of Destruction." "Yes," replied Mr. Honesty, "since our town is shaded from the sun, we are more cold and senseless. But even if a man were in a mountain of ice, if the sun of righteousness will rise upon him, his frozen heart will begin to thaw. And this is how it has been with me." "I believe you, Mr. Honest," said Greatheart. "I believe you, and I know that what you say is true. Then the old gentleman saluted all the pilgrims and gave them a loving, holy kiss. He asked all of them their names and how they had fared since they had first set out on their pilgrimage. "You may have heard of me," said Christiana. "Good Christian was my husband, and these 4 were his children." But you cannot imagine how excited the old gentleman was at hearing this. He skipped and laughed and blessed them with 1,000 good wishes, saying, "I have heard a great deal about your husband and his travels, and also the wars that he experienced on his pilgrimage. May it be a comfort to you to know that his name is revered and resounds all over these parts of the world. His faith, his courage, his patient endurance, and his sincerity in all that he undertook have made his name famous." Then he turned to Christiana's sons and asked them their names, and they told him. He said to them, "Matthew, be like Matthew the publican, not in vice, but in virtue. Samuel, be like Samuel the prophet, a man of faith and prayer. Joseph, be like Joseph in Potiphar's house, pure, and one who flees from temptation. And James, you be like James the just, and like James the brother of our Lord." Then they told him about Mercy, about how she had left her town and her family to come along with Christiana and her sons. Upon hearing this, the old man said, "Mercy is your name, and by mercy you will be sustained and carried through all the difficulties that will assault you in your way until you come to see face to face the very fountain of mercy, in whom you will find consolation." All this time Greatheart was greatly pleased and was smiling upon his new companion. Chapter 27, Part 3. Poor Mr. Fearing. Now as they began to walk along together, Greatheart asked the old gentleman if he knew someone called Mr. Fearing, who had come out of his parts to go on a pilgrimage. "Yes, very well," he replied. "He was a man who had a grasp of spiritual things within him, but he was one of the most troublesome pilgrims I have ever met in all my days." "Yes, I can see how you knew him, for you have given an accurate portrayal of him." "Indeed, I did know him," said Mr. Honest. "I was a close companion of his. I was with him most of the time, and when he first began to think of what could come upon us hereafter, I was with him. I was his guide from my master's house to the gates of the celestial city," said Greatheart. "Then you knew him to be a troublesome one." "Yes, I did, but I could bear it well, because men of my calling are often entrusted with conducting those of his sort." "Well then, please let us hear a little about him, and how he handled himself under your guidance." "Why, he was always afraid, and he would fall short of his desired destination," said Greatheart. "Anyone who spoke with the least bit of opposition in his voice frightened him greatly. I heard that he lay down and cried at the Slough of Despond for more than a month. He didn't dare venture forward, even though he saw several others go over before him. He wouldn't go even when they offered him a helping hand, but neither would he go back again. He said he would die if he didn't reach the celestial city, and yet he was dejected at every difficulty. He stumbled at every straw that anyone cast in his way. Well, after he had lain there at the Slough of Despond for a great while, one bright sunny morning, I don't know how, he finally ventured on and got over. Once over, however, he could scarcely believe it. I think he had a Slough of Despond in his mind, a slough that he carried with him everywhere he went. How else could he have been the way he was? At any rate, he finally came up to the gate that stands at the beginning of this way, and he stood there also for quite some time before he mustered the courage to knock. Whenever the gate opened, he would draw back and let others go in, saying he was not worthy. He had arrived at the gate before them, but they went in ahead of him. The poor man would stand there shaking and shrinking back. It was heartbreaking, no doubt, to see him there, and yet he still would not go back. At long last he took the hammer that hung on the gate into his hand, and he gave a small rap or two. When someone opened to him, he shrunk back just as he had done before. So the one who opened the gate stepped out after him and said, "You, trembling one, what do you want?" With that he fell to the ground. The one who asked the question marveled to see him so faint, and said, "Be at peace and get up, for I have opened the door to you. Come on in, for you are blessed." He got up off the ground and went in, still trembling. Once inside, he was ashamed to show his face. After he had been entertained there for a while, however, he was encouraged to go on his way, and they told him what direction he should take. So he went on until he came to our house, and when he arrived at the door of my master, the interpreter, he behaved just as he had done at the gate. He lay there in the cold for a good while before he gathered enough courage to call on us. Yet he still wouldn't go back, even though the nights at that time were long and cold. He had been given a note of introduction written to my master, telling him to receive him, to grant him the comfort of his house, and to provide him a strong and valiant guide, because he himself was such a chicken-hearted man. Yet in spite of all this, he was afraid to call at the door. So he slept outside in different spots until the poor man nearly starved. His depression was so great that even after he saw several others get in by simply knocking, he was still afraid to venture the risk. At last I happened to look out the window and saw a man pacing in front of the door. So I went out to him and asked him what he was doing. But the poor man, tears were running down his face, and I could tell what he wanted. So I went back inside and told those inside the house about him, and we took the matter to our Lord. He sent me back out to ask him in, so I did, but I must say I had to work to get him inside. Finally he came in, and my Lord was very gentle and loving with him. There was only a little food left on the table, but we put it on his platter to eat. When he presented his note, my Lord read it, and then told him that his desire would be granted. So after he had been there for a while, he began to feel encouraged and was able to relax and to be a little more comfortable. My master, I am sure you know, is a very tender-hearted man, especially towards those who are afraid. Therefore he dealt with him in a manner that would most encourage him. Well, after we showed him some sights around the place, he was ready to resume his journey toward the city once again. My Lord, just as he had done for Christian, gave him a bottle of spirits and some good food to eat. Then we set forth together, and I went ahead of him. He didn't have much to say, he just spent a lot of time sighing. When we had come to the place where the 3 men had been hanged, he said that he had feared that might be also his end. But he seemed happy when he saw the cross and the tomb. He wanted to stay a while and look, and after doing this, he was even somewhat cheerful for a time. When he came to the Hill of Difficulty, it wasn't an issue for him. He wasn't very afraid of the lions either. You realize, of course, that his trouble was not with those types of obstacles. His fear had to do with whether or not he would find acceptance. I got him in at the House Beautiful, I think before he was ready. Once he was inside, I introduced him to the women of the place, but he was ashamed to socialize with them. He wanted to be alone much of the time. Even so, he liked to hear good conversation, and would often stand behind the door and listen. He also loved to look at items of historical interest. Once he saw them, he would ponder them in his mind for quite some time. He told me afterwards that even though he did not have the courage to ask to come in, he had loved being in the houses that he had visited, both the one at the gate and the interpreter's house. When we left the House Beautiful and went down the hill into the Valley of Humiliation, he handled it as well as I had ever seen any man in my life. He didn't care how low he might have to go, just so long as he would be happy in the end. Yes, I even think there was some empathy between the valley and him, for I never saw him better in all his pilgrimage than when he was in that valley. He would lie down there and hug the ground and kiss the very flowers that grew there. Suddenly he was getting up every morning at the crack of dawn, discovering what he could as he walked back and forth there. But when he came to the entrance to the Valley of the Shadow of Death, I thought that I might lose him, not because of any inclination to go back, he abhorred the thought of that, but because he was ready to die of fear. "Oh, the demons will take me, the demons will take me," he cried. I couldn't convince him otherwise. He made such a racket and carried on so irrationally that if they had hurt him, they would have been immediately encouraged to come and fall upon us. I became keenly aware of the fact, however, that this valley was more quiet when he went through it than it was at any other time in my experience. I suppose that the enemies here had been specially checked by our Lord and commanded not to meddle until Mr. Fearing had passed through it. It would be wearisome to tell you all that happened, so I will just mention a few more incidents. When he come to Vanity Fair, I thought he was going to fight with all the men in the fair. I feared that we would both be knocked over the head there. He was so intensely angry at their foolishness. He stayed awake on the enchanted ground with no problem. But when he had come to the river where there is no bridge, he once again became distraught. He cried out, "Right here and now I am going to be drowned forever, and never enjoy the comfort of seeing that face I have come so many miles to see." Once again I noticed something unusual. The water level was lower at this time than I had ever seen it in all my life. So finally he went over with the water barely ankle deep. Once he was on his way to the gate, I called out a goodbye to him and wished him a happy reception at the gate. So he smiled and said, "I will, I will." Then I left, and I didn't see him again. We'll stop there for this week. Next week we'll pick up with Chapter 27, Part 4. They evaluate Mr. Fearing. Until then, take care, stay safe, and God bless.